Hey guys, this is our moral development lecture for November 22nd, 2016. I thought I would post this lecture online since I know some people have to travel. I thought it might be a little bit easier for us to carry out the lecture online as opposed to in person. Please note that I'm going to mention some video clips as we go along. I've posted a list of video clips to Moodle, and as we go along, I'll indicate which video clip to play at what time, which I think will just help to kind of highlight the point I'm trying to make and maybe illustrate it in an interesting way. Just some updates. Exam 2 grades will be posted in the next few days on Moodle, and Exam 2 will be passed back and reviewed in class next week. And so if there's any questions about grades, I'm very happy to talk to you guys about that. And we'll be reviewing the exams. Also, essay number 3 is due today at 6 p.m. Moral development. How do we define moral development? One definition is it is changes in thoughts, feelings, and behaviors regarding standards of right or wrong. So how can we possibly measure moral development? How can we measure whether the different levels of morality in babies versus infants versus children versus adolescents? Lawrence Kohlberg, who we're going to talk about more, thought one approach could be to ask a moral dilemma, a challenging ethical question, and see how people respond to that question. People's responses to this challenging ethical question, he believed, would reveal their level of moral reasoning, their level of moral development. So let's discuss the Heinz dilemma. A woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to produce. The druggist paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get together about $1,000, which is half of what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." So Heinz got desperate and broke into the man's laboratory to steal the drug for his wife. Should Heinz have broken into the laboratory to steal the drug for his wife? Why or why not? This is the very famous Heinz dilemma, created by Lawrence Kohlberg. Kohlberg, as we're going to discuss a little later in the lecture, presented this dilemma to children of different ages. And as children grew older, their answer to this dilemma changed. So I present this dilemma to you early in the lecture to give you one example of how scientists have thought about how we can measure morality. So I want to encourage you now to watch video 1. In this video, you're going to see some responses from children as to how they would respond to the Heinz dilemma. What's very interesting in this video is children give some reasons as to why they think stealing the drug is wrong. Reflect on the answers they give. Think about what reasons do these children give for why stealing the drug would be wrong. And most importantly, what does this tell us about their worldview? Why do a lot of the children in this video believe that stealing the drug is wrong? How does their age come into play? How might older children respond? And as we get started here, I want to pose another question that you can kind of keep in mind as we move along. When does morality even emerge? How old? Some interesting studies have shown that babies prefer helpful over not helpful puppets. So I want to encourage you to watch video 2, which is the link is posted again on that list of links on Moodle. Video 2 presents research studies showing that when presented with puppet shows where some puppets are helpful and some are not helpful, babies seem to prefer those puppets that are helpful. Now, as you watch it, you can decide for yourself, how convinced are you by the study? Does it feel like babies are genuinely showing a preference for one puppet over the other? But it's an interesting video because it really poses that important question of how early is morality even arising? How soon do babies tell right from wrong? Where is that coming from? Is it genetically wired? How does environment play into that? As we'll talk about later, the environment is very important also in shaping moral development. Okay, so we're going to come back to the Heinz dilemma shortly. But now let's sort of pull back and talk about the 3 main components of moral development. The 3 main components of moral development are affective or emotional, cognitive, and behavioral. All 3 factors are important contributors to moral development. So let's focus first on affective component of moral development. Some of the affective components that come into play when it comes to the development of moral behavior, moral thought in children related to feelings such as guilt or concern for others' feelings, feelings of pain that children might experience when they see somebody else suffering, feelings of pain they might experience when they see a child being left out, feelings of guilt they might have when they steal a cookie, feelings of guilt they might have if they hit another child. These emotions play an important role in the moral development of children. These feelings relate to whether they perceive that particular events are right or wrong. So feelings can motivate moral thoughts and actions. If a child is reaching into the cookie jar when she's been forbidden to do so, and feelings of guilt arise, this can motivate moral thoughts such as, oh, I really shouldn't do this. It's not right. Or it can motivate moral actions like, I'm going to put that cookie back. There's going to be an impact of worldview, individual differences in how children are raised, the worldview that they have, that can influence the kind of moral emotions they experience as they encounter day-to-day ethical dilemmas. Moral emotions. As we talk about that, we're focusing a lot on these self-conscious or self-evaluative emotions. These can involve emotions like pride or shame or guilt. And the development of self-conscious emotions rely on some understanding and evaluation of the self. So babies are not thought to be born with self-conscious emotions. It's thought that they tend to arise by the end of the 3rd year. And if you think about it, some pretty important structures and cognitive abilities need to be in place for a child to experience self-evaluative, self-conscious emotions. They need to have a sense of self-awareness. They need to have a sense of self-representation. They need to have some degree of theory of mind, which we discussed in our information processing lecture. So how do other minds work? What are other perspectives on things? These factors need to have developed for a child to be able to experience self-evaluative emotions like pride or shame or guilt. And it's thought that guilt and shame in particular really help to alert a child to the moral implications of situations. As we mentioned earlier, they have the ability to motivate action, possibly prevent immoral behaviors. So we turn to Kahanska and Murray's famous study looking at the development of conscience in children. So Kahanska and Murray were very interested in how does the parent-child relationship, a mutually responsive relationship, contribute to a child demonstrating pro-social behavior, demonstrating a commitment to the parent's values. So what is a mutually responsive relationship? It's one where there's a responsiveness to the needs and goals of the other between a parent and a child. The parent responds to the child's cues and needs and emotions, and in turn, the child is also responsive and aware of the parent's emotions, of what the parent asked them to do, of the parent's preferences. So there's a mutual responsivity. In addition, there's shared positive emotion. The parent and the child are sharing positive times. They're laughing together. They're playing together. So Kahanska and Murray believe these two elements were critical in a mutually responsive relationship. So they hypothesized if a child is securely attached to warm and responsive parents, and if the parent and child share many positive emotional experiences, then children are more likely to show committed compliance. What is committed compliance? It's this notion that children have an orientation to embrace the parent's agenda and follow rules. They will internalize parent reactions and experience emotions like pride and guilt. So let's think of an example. If we have a child and a parent who share a mutually responsive orientation, and the child's in the playground, and they start to kick the slide in order to knock the slide down, and the parent expresses anger that this is not the right way to act. The child may internalize that parental reaction of anger and experience an emotion like guilt for their behavior. And then they may in the future be less likely to kick toys, kick slides, because they've now embraced the parental agenda and they want to follow the parents' rules. So Kahanska and Murray are essentially positing that if there's a precursor variable of that warm, mutually responsive relationship between the parent and the child may be more likely to internalize parental reactions of disapproval or of their actions, and more likely to experience self-evaluative emotions like pride or guilt, and are more likely to, in the future, commit willingly to the parent's agenda and follow the parent's rules. So Kahanska and Murray's theory is just another great example of how in child development, and really in the whole field of psychology, we often see these intersecting spheres of different domains. In this case, we're seeing how parenting, attachment, and moral development, not to mention cognitive development, the ability to develop, self-awareness, self-representation, etc. And that also involves social development as well. How all of these factors come together from different domains to shape children's moral development. And just to include one more rather interesting study that kind of demonstrates the role of moral emotions, there has been some research linking physical and moral disgust. One study involved undergraduates, and they essentially gave undergraduates a bitter drink that was meant to induce physical disgust. And then they presented the undergraduates with moral dilemmas. And what was found was those undergraduates who had been given the bitter drink and who had had physical disgust induced within them, they tended to show more moral disgust in response to the moral dilemmas with which they were presented. In short, physical disgust seems to contribute to moral disgust when presented with ambiguous ethical dilemmas. So let's turn to the second component of moral development, cognitive. So cognitive aspects of moral development involve, how do we conceptualize intellectually what's right and what's wrong? What is the decision tree we make about deciding what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do? So within the field of moral development, two giants stand out, Jean Piaget and Lawrence Kohlberg. They developed important theories about how moral development unfolds in children. Jean Piaget, as we've discussed before in this course, really relied on naturalistic observation. He thought the best way to understand child development is to observe children in their natural setting, take careful notes. So he used naturalistic observation in the development of his theory of moral development. So Jean Piaget took a staged approach. He believed children move through different stages. There's the premoral stage, the heteronymous morality stage, the mix between heteronymous and autonomous morality, and finally the autonomous morality stage. So let's walk through these different stages. Among children who are preschool aged and younger, Piaget thought that, as he watched them playing games, they were making up their own rules. There wasn't this strong adherence to rules. They were just making up their own rules. And they generally thought that the point of the game is to have fun and to take turns with each other. Children were not playing systematically with the intention of winning. So he thought this was sort of a pre-moral stage. As we go into age 4 to 7, Piaget posited that children are starting to judge morality by consequences and not by intention of actors involved. So, for example, if you ask a child at this age, is it better to break 1 cup on purpose or break 12 cups by accident? They're going to say that breaking 1 cup on purpose is better because the consequences, fewer broken cups, are less. In short, for children at this age, the consequences of events seem to be more important than the intentions of actors. So at this age, there are 2 key concepts that really stand out, moral realism and immanent justice. So for moral realism, children believe that rules are really unchangeable and handed down by powerful authorities. There's a real rigidity at this age. There's not that much questioning of rules. Where did the rule come from? What was the motive of the person who created this rule? They're just handed down by powerful authorities and there's not much wiggle room. There's also this notion of immanent justice. If a rule is broken, punishment will be handed out immediately. Even if the child is alone and there's no parents around, they tend to believe if a rule is broken, punishment is coming. So as children start to progress to the autonomous morality stage, we start to see more moral relativism. Children recognize that rules are created by people to help them get along. Social rules are arbitrary and agreements can be changed. In this age, children are realizing that blind and automatic obedience is not always right. Sometimes disobedience is the moral thing to do if the rule itself is not fair. So there's this idea that rules are not these unchangeable factors that are handed down by powerful authorities, but can be questioned and agreements can be changed. In this stage, we see children engaging in more perspective taking. Piaget also believed that parents didn't have that much influence on moral development of children. So he really pointed to the role of peer influences in shaping moral development and helping them progress from one stage to the next. So let's turn to Lawrence Kohlberg, a second giant in the field of moral development. unlike Piaget, who relied on naturalistic observation, Kohlberg believed that it was important to present hypothetical ethical dilemmas to children and then observe and note down how they responded to these dilemmas. Similar to Piaget, Kohlberg believed children progress through stages. And he believed that there are 6 universal stages of moral development. Universal meaning all children have to progress through these stages. He also believed that they are invariant. In other words, you have to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. There's no way to go from, for example, step 1 to step 3, back down to step 2, up to step 4. You have to go in order. And Kohlberg proposed that children progress from one moral stage to the next as their power and ability of perspective taking improved, and as they encountered other people who were at higher stages of moral development and experienced conflict between their lower level of moral development and someone else's higher level of moral development, that conflict helped children progress to the next level of moral development. So Kohlberg suggested that there are 6 stages of moral development. Let's walk through them. In the pre-conventional level, the punishment and obedience stage of moral development suggests that children will just judge the goodness or badness of an act depending on its consequences. That brings to mind the cups example we talked about earlier. In the naive hedonism stage, we see children deciding to conform to rules to get rewards. So a child may be willing to be obedient to a parent's rules, not because it's the right thing to do, but they know they're going to get an ice cream treat if they behave. So in level B, the conventional level, we have the good boy or good girl morality. In this stage, children are not necessarily adhering to rules or laws or taking moral action because of abstract concepts like fairness or justice. Instead, they're doing it because they recognize it'll please others, help others, or will be approved of by others. In the social order maintaining stage, we see that children may show this adherence to the rules and the legal authority within society because they think it's important to maintain social order. There's a reverence and a willingness to conform to the will of society as reflected in law. And finally, the post-conventional level. So here we see the social contract orientation stage. Here, children are viewing laws as instruments to express the will of the majority and further human welfare. They recognize that laws that hurt human rights should not be followed. In short, they're recognizing now that laws and rules are really in place in order to support the well-being and human rights of people, and that it's important to follow laws only insofar as they support human rights and don't violate them. And finally, we have the morality of individual principles of conscience. This is the final stage of moral development. In this stage, individuals are making moral decisions based on self-chosen ethical principles of right and wrong and their own conscience. They are following abstract ideas like fairness, justice in making their moral decisions. It's in this stage we have individuals who may living in a society where the laws and the rules are unfair or unjust and decide to ignore those societal rules and follow their own internal moral compass, their own guidelines that they've developed about what is right and what is wrong. Okay, so I want to encourage you to watch video 3, and you're going to see some interesting changes in response to the Heinz dilemma. and see if you can pick out which of Kohlberg's stages of moral development each child in the video would fall in based on their response to the ethical dilemma that they are presented. So, is Kohlberg's theory right? There has been some support. Some studies conducted in various countries, including those listed here, have found that children do tend to proceed through the moral stages in the order that Kohlberg suggested. At the same time, some studies have found that if children are presented different dilemmas, not the Heinz dilemma, but other dilemmas, occasionally they don't seem to progress through the moral stages in the order that Kohlberg suggested. In short, the content of the ethical dilemma presented seems to have some impact on the order in which children progress through the stages of moral development. So it would be interesting to consider what stage are most people at? Does everyone reach level 6? What stage do you think most adolescents are at? Adolescents tend to be in stage 3, with some in stages 2 to 4. Most people in the world are in stage 3 or 4. One study found 62% of 36-year-olds were at stage 4. In general, we notice that people reach stage 5 at age 20 to 22. So it's interesting to consider that, on average in the world, not everyone is attaining level 6. A lot of people are at level 3 or 4. So Kohlberg's theory has definitely come under criticism for being too culturally specific. People have posited that it may be biased against cultures that value community well-being or social harmony over individual autonomy. As an example, in the Hindu religion in India, there's a strong emphasis on duty and responsibility to others, and there's a great deal of importance given to caring for others. In the Heinz dilemma, we may find that Hindu children would be more likely to support theft if it's the best way to care for the wife, even if individual rights or justice suffers. So from a different cultural lens, children may give different answers, and yet Kohlberg's theory may not be able to account for how different cultural lenses are shaping the moral thinking of children from different parts of the world. So now let's focus on the third component of moral development, behavioral. How do we act? How do we behave when we're faced with temptation or with a moral dilemma? First, some important definitions. Altruism can be defined as genuine concern for the welfare of other people and willingness to act on that concern. Pro-social behavior can be defined as any action intended to benefit other people, like sharing, comforting, or complimenting. So we see some important developmental changes in altruism. 12 to 18-month-olds offer toys to companions occasionally and will sometimes try to help with chores. At 2 years old, we notice that children are more likely to offer toys to peers when playthings are scarce. From 2 to 3 years old, we notice that children are showing sympathy and compassion to other distressed individuals. At the same time, they're not necessarily going to make self-sacrificing gestures like sharing a treasured toy unless they're really prompted by adults or peers. And finally, in the early elementary school years onwards, we notice that sharing, helping others, pro-social acts are really getting more and more common. So, what are some of the skills that underlie the development of pro-social behavior? Perspective taking, as we mentioned earlier, which, increases as children improve their general social and cognitive abilities. Perspective taking is a huge factor that helps to contribute to more and more pro-social behavior in children. As we talked about in the emotional development lecture, young children sometimes experience a cognitive egocentrism. They tend to kind of see the world and believe that everyone has the same preferences and beliefs and viewpoints that they have. As they get older, they're able to break free of that. Empathy. So children who experience great amounts of sadness or sorrow or anger about the suffering of others are more likely to take on prosocial acts. And as children are able to cognitively use and apply abstract concepts like fairness or justice, it's difficult for a toddler to think about and use those types of concepts in their moral thinking. But as children get older and they're able to ponder these abstract concepts and leverage them in their moral decision making, we see that they engage in more pro-social behavior. Let's turn to the topic of gratitude. It can be defined as feelings of thankfulness and appreciation, especially in response to someone doing something kind and helpful. And it is interestingly linked with pro-social behavior. So gratitude is associated with satisfaction with one's family, optimism, and pro-social behavior. In adolescence, it's linked with fewer depressive symptoms and actually more empathy. In one longitudinal study, they found that adolescents who showed more gratitude tended 4 years later to have a stronger sense of meaning of life, more satisfaction, less negative emotion, and less depression. Let's take another look at how culture and moral development intersect with each other. So what are some of these universals? What do most children around the world seem to agree on? Well, it may be unsurprising, but around the world there seems to be a belief that it's important for individuals to make decisions in the personal domain on their own and not be subjected to too much adult interference. And there seems to be a generally universal belief that it's not good to hurt others. And we see some cultural differences in pro-social lying. In some cultures, it's considered okay to lie in order to protect others from harm, protect feelings. And in other cultures, it's not considered necessarily to be the right moral stance to take. In one study, they looked at how among American children, lying to make an individual happy is often considered okay, even if it hurts the group. So for example, if a child is a poor singer, still allowing them to join a choir so that the child feels happy, even if the choir as a whole will suffer, is often considered the right thing to do in American society. So that's a form of pro-social lying where the importance of the individual and their feelings of happiness is considered to be important, even if the whole choir as a group suffers. And so more in previous times, the research has been a little too black and white. They've tried to look at how Americans view morality one way, Chinese children view morality another way, Nigerian children view morality another way, and there's an increasing understanding now that it's important to really recognize the vast diversity even within a specific country, within a specific state, within a specific city. Morality and moral development are impacted by unique rituals, individual differences related to the environment, customs, belief, your socioeconomic status. One study looked at moral development in US, Latino, Latina, and Latinx youth. They found that the value of family ties and identity with the family unit shape moral development particularly strongly within this group. What are some of the situational influences on pro-social behavior? Children differ in how responsible they feel for other people. If you see children walking down the street and passing by an individual who is homeless, some children may have strong feelings of responsibility for the welfare of this person who is experiencing homelessness and may petition their parents to provide help. Other children may not feel strong feelings of responsibility for the welfare of an individual who's on the street homeless and may not feel so many strong moral emotions about the situation. So there are differences in feelings of responsibility towards others. We notice there's also differences in feelings of competence. Children who simply believe they're capable of helping others are more likely to do so. Children who don't feel competent to help others are less likely to show pro-social behavior. Mood is critically important. Children actually act more altruistically when they're happy or feeling successful. In one study, preschoolers who spent the morning as the leader in nursery school was more likely later to share treats with siblings. That feeling of success that they had, happiness, led to more altruistic behavior. So how is pro-social behavior socialized? There are three important influences we can consider. Modeling is an important factor. When children see adults helping others, caring for others, they'll often imitate this pro-social behavior. Parents who report feelings of warmth and concern for others do tend to have children who are more empathetic. Parental disciplinary practices. When children experience discipline that feels warm, supportive, feedback, guidelines, they tend to act more pro-socially. Interestingly, disciplinary practices that don't necessarily feel arbitrary, don't feel like they're coming out of nowhere, but instead are based around reasoning, where parents explain why they're disciplining their child, where there's a sense of understanding about why punishment is being handed out to them, encourages pro-social behavior in children. The use of emotional language is important. As an example, a parent who uses emotional language might say, you know, you shouldn't grab things from people. Why? Well, how do you think it'll make them feel? You should ask first so that they feel okay. So parents use this emotional language to alert children to the feelings of others, help them gain in perspective taking. And this type of disciplinary practice encourages more pro-social behavior in children. And opportunities. Being given an opportunity to engage in pro-social behavior unsurprisingly increases pro-social behavior. Some children have never had the experience of being asked to do chores, being asked to volunteer to help somebody, being asked to participate in a community project. So they've never known the power and the pleasure and the meaning that comes from helping others. So being given more and more opportunities to engage in pro-social behavior encourages more of it in the future. So in our final section, we're going to talk about what are the origins of great moral courage. Three great leaders are here: Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and Aung Kyaw Soo Kyi. All of them have changed their countries and changed the world. Martin Luther King was a individual who fought in the civil rights movement and fought for the equal rights of Black Americans. He put his life at risk time after time, making speeches, being tracked by the US government, and he was eventually assassinated. Nelson Mandela was a freedom fighter in South Africa at a time when apartheid laws made it legal to discriminate against and segregate Black South Africans. He also put his life at risk to get engaged in politics. He was imprisoned for 27 years because of his efforts to foster equality in his country. And he was finally freed and allowed to help be one of the main architects of true democracy in South Africa. Aung San Suu Kyi was an individual who was trying to fight for democracy in her country of Burma. And it was incredibly dangerous. The country has been run by a military junta. And she tried to use democratic means and fight through the political system to challenge this undemocratic government. She was imprisoned under house arrest for a total of 15 years, but never gave up, and eventually was freed and actually became the leader of her country, which she is today. So you have to ask yourself, these unbelievable, amazing stories, what are the origins of these individuals? What kind of parents did they have? What kind of childhood experiences did they have? Why are they so full of fire to help others? Why do they seem to go almost against our natural survival instinct and decide instead to sacrifice and put their own life at risk to help others? Why do the needs of others seem so central to their own identity? How is it that they're prioritizing the needs and suffering of other people over their own needs? So these are some very important questions we need to understand to be able to understand the origins of great moral courage. And I just included a short clip from Martin Luther King's amazing I Have a Dream speech, just as an opportunity to consider as you watch it the fact that Martin Luther King was putting his life at risk as he gave that speech. He knew he could have been a target for assassination at that point, and he decided it was more important to try to uplift Black and white citizens across the country than to consider his own needs. Malala Yousafzai. She is another individual who showed great moral courage, and I have included her because I think her story illustrates, in particular, the input and contribution of positive parental figures in the development of moral behavior and moral courage. So if you look at video 5, you'll see a short little piece of background about Malala Yousafzai, who recently won the Nobel Peace Prize. Essentially, Malala was living in Pakistan at a time when the Taliban were coming over the border from Afghanistan and had settled in her part of Pakistan and were telling citizens that girls could not get an education. Malala spoke out against this and was even interviewed by international news media outlets. And she was strongly supported by her father. She stated that she wanted to get an education and she was going to keep going after it. The Taliban attacked her and shot her. She had to flee the country and get medical care in the United Kingdom, and continued, even though it still puts her life at risk, to speak out for girls' education. She eventually won the Nobel Peace Prize. And her story gives a very interesting example of the role of parents. Now, again, this is a case study. This is a case example, and it's difficult to form great extrapolations based on this one case. But it's interesting to consider how her story does adhere to some of the research we've just reviewed. We notice modeling is an important factor in her life. Her father is a social activist, and he has also encouraged her actively, very actively, to fight for her rights and fight for her right for education. She also has an extremely close relationship with her father. There's just not enough research, unfortunately, in the field as to the origins of moral courage. It's a gap in the literature. One study looked at the lives of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and Mandela. They conducted a qualitative investigation. And they found some common threads and common themes between all of their lives. They found that all of them gave importance to their parents' values. All of them experienced injustice in childhood, and all explored alternative viewpoints in adolescence, that sort of perspective taking. They were good at perspective taking. So these are just some of the themes that have emerged that are similar in the lives of these three individuals. Again, these are case examples. This is a case study. It's hard to extrapolate to large numbers of people using case studies, but it helps to give us some clues as to what could be going on that could help to stimulate great moral courage in individuals. So, some of the key takeaways from today's lecture. There are three components of moral development: affective, cognitive, and behavioral. And moral development is influenced by culture, socialization practices of parents, and specific situational conditions.